Good Monday evening, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well. We're going to talk a little bit more about the salary cap here in this video, but first, real quick, I am going to be streaming tonight on Twitch. We're doing more of the Dead Space remake. I'm going to be looking to beat the game either tonight or tomorrow, so stop on by and we're going to have some fun. Hope to see you there. Okay, salary cap. Let's talk more salary cap stuff because we got that announcement earlier today from the NFL. We now know exactly what the salary cap is going to be for every team in 2023. And with that information, we can start to understand some things. And at the end of the day, in the NFL, when you're competing against 31 other teams, everything is relative. Or pretty much everything is relative, right? Like, if there was a season, if there came a season where every team was terrible, like maybe there was a lockout, a strike, and the players just refused to show up to play for their teams, and they were all striking for some cause, or maybe something they wanted in the CBA, and all the players were scabs and barely knew how to play football, and every team was terrible, all you would have to do is be bad, and you would probably win the Super Bowl, right? Because if every other team is terrible, you would just have to be bad to be clearly the best team. Likewise, cap space. Earlier today I made a video and I mentioned the Seahawks are currently sitting on $31.3 million in cap space, but that number doesn't really mean anything unless you compare it to other teams in the league. $31.3 million could be a lot, or it could be very little, depending on what the other teams have. So let's try to put that number in context here by looking at the current situation for every other team in the league in terms of their cap space. Now, before we get into this, keep in mind that every team that we're about to go through is going to be able to do some things this offseason to clear cap space. And that goes for the Seahawks as well. So by no means are these numbers definite or final or ultra meaningful yet. But from it, we can get an idea of which teams are most likely going to be able to have some money this offseason and which ones most likely won't. So if we take a look at the list here on Spotrac, as of right now, with the updated cap numbers, you can see that we have one team with a ridiculous amount of cap space, almost $100 million in the Chicago Bears. Then you have a slew of teams that have $40 to $60 million in cap space. And then you get down to the next tier, the guys who have $30 to $40 million in cap space. The Seahawks are there. So as of right now, the Seahawks are 8th in the league in cap space. Only 7 teams have more current cap space than the Seahawks. Then there's a big drop off to teams that have anywhere from 10 to 20 million. Quite a few teams in this range. Then you get down to the teams that just have a little bit of positive cap space. And league average right now for cap space is about 6 million, 6.2. So if you take every team's current amount of salary cap space, the average is 6.2 million. Much less than the Seahawks' current amount of cap space. By the way, when you break through to the bottom half of the league, they're all in the negatives. You have a couple of teams that are just a few million in the negative, less than 10 million in the negative. You have a slew of teams that are 10 to 20 million in the negative. Couple of teams that are 20 to 25 million in the negative. You've got the Jaguars, who are about 32 million in the negative. And then you have the teams that are danger Will Robinson down here, over 55 million negative, Bucks and Saints. So what I'm trying to say here is, when you put that number in context, it's a lot of money. And you can also learn other things looking at this chart, like you can look at the dead cap, because we know that dead cap is not something you can do anything about. So this gives you an idea of what teams are going to be able to finagle the cap to get more room and which ones won't. Like the Bears have 20 million in dead cap. That's a big, or a reasonably sizable chunk of the cap that they're not going to be able to free up. Not that they're going to need to, so okay. You have teams that have basically no dead cap, like the Bengals here, but when you're looking up here, it's not that big of a deal because you're talking about teams that already have cap space. You look down here, you can see, if you take a look at some of the teams that don't have cap space, a lot of them don't have a lot of dead cap, but the Panthers are an exception to that. They have negative $9.5 million in dead cap, and they have almost $29 million dead. So you put all that together, and it's going to be really hard for them to free up money, but it should be much easier for a team like Tampa Bay or the Chargers to free up money, and the Packers because they have so little dead money. So you can kind of get an idea of the way this is going to go. But the point I'm trying to make here ultimately is that the Seahawks, their $31.3 million should go a pretty long way. And ultimately, when we get to free agency, when we're making decisions on players like Geno Smith, when we're potentially thinking about going after a player like Daron Payne, potentially going after maybe lower level players that are not necessarily going to command big dollars, but are going to command significant dollars, we're competing against every other team in the league. And when you take a look at this chart, you're kind of reminded that a lot of the teams that you think you're going to be competing against, not necessarily going to be able to show up the way you're expecting because they just don't have the funds for it or are going to have to work really hard to get those funds. Like, I'll use the Geno thing as an example. I think that in terms of pure need, there are going to be several teams this offseason that do not have a quarterback or are setting themselves up to not have a quarterback that might feel like they want a quarterback now so they can go win, like Geno Smith. If you feel like you have the team set up ready to go to win, but you don't have the quarterback or you don't like your quarterback or whatever, you might go after Geno Smith. Now, some of the teams that might do this, what are some of the teams that might consider doing that? Well, you look at this list, you're going to see some teams up here that do have some cap space. Like, for instance, the Ravens. If the Ravens let Lamar go and they feel like they really like their team, they could go after Geno. They have the money for it. But then you look at it and you see, wait a minute, they've only got 26 players under contract. This money's going to go really fast. Can they do that? Yeah, they can, but it's not as easy as it looks according to this cap number. The Giants, I guess they could do that if they decide to not have Daniel Jones. They decide they don't want to commit to him. They let him go, and then they decide, hey, wait a minute, we've got a really good team here. Let's try to get a better quarterback, a quarterback who can win now, and see how far we can push this. Yeah, they could go after Geno. But look at some of the other teams that you would think would go after a guy like Geno. Like, for me, one of the chief candidates for a Geno Smith either signing or trade this offseason is Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is negative $56 million in cap space. And this is not including the Brady contract. Brady is not under contract. They can't cut Brady and free up a ton of money. Now, they're going to do stuff, of course, to get under the cap. They literally have to. But think about how hard they would have to work to free up enough money just to get in the black, and then free up enough money from there to actually go get a guy like a Geno Smith. Same for a team like the New Orleans Saints. They're even further in the red. It would take an incredible amount of work for them to do it. So when they get to the offseason, Geno's trying to market his abilities out there as a free agent, and there are going to be some teams that go like, we'd love to, but we just don't have the funds for it. Tennessee is another team. If they moved off Tannehill, Geno would probably be a decent target for them, but they're so deep in the red right now at $23.7 million. The work they would have to do to free up enough cap space to do that it's daunting. It might be too much. Maybe even a team like the Rams. The Rams could go after Geno if Stafford retires, but with the amount of dead cap that they would eat on a Stafford retirement when that happened, you look at it and you kind of go, there might not really be as much money out there for Geno as I was suspecting. So maybe it's not that bad. I believe, based off the way Geno played in 2022, he should be getting about $35 million a year. I stand by that. Based off the way he played, he should be getting like $35 million a year. But if the money is not there, the money is not there. And when you take a look at this, when you see half the teams in the league are currently sitting on negative cap space, when you look at the average amount of cap space around the league being $6.2 million, by the way, that number would probably be like 4 or maybe even 3 million if the Bears didn't have such an obscene amount of cap space. They're an outlier here. They are a true outlier up here. If you even brought them down to like 60 million, think about what that would do to the league average. And then you start looking at the teams that would even consider going after a guy like a Geno Smith right now. it becomes easier to imagine that we let Geno test the market. He's not finding the offers he was necessarily expecting because the money's not there. And maybe it's a little easier for the Seahawks to use their cap space, which is significant, to keep him around. Maybe they go after a guy like a Daron Payne in the offseason. Now, Washington only has $7 million in cap space right now. They have a decent chunk of it dead. They may not be able to keep Daron Payne for purely financial reasons because they're going to have other extensions coming up as well. They have a really, really good defensive line. They're going to have to make a decision to not keep at least one of those guys, I believe. Remember, they paid Terry McLaurin. They still need a quarterback. I think they can free up some money if they move on from Wentz, which I'm sure they will if they can. But if you are bringing to the table your cap space and you're competing with Washington trying to retain Daron Payne, and they're only sitting on less than $7 million plus whatever they're able to free up, you're bringing a lot more to the table there, and you can really outbid Washington by a pretty wide margin. Look at the other teams that might go after like a Daron Payne. What are the other teams that could consider doing it? What other teams does it make sense for? You know, if you're a team like the Detroit Lions, maybe, but you've got more than double or about double their cap space. Maybe you would see, it seems like a move the Eagles would make. The Eagles like to make moves like that, but they're sitting on less than $5 million. So in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And in the land of teams that have very little cap space, the team with $31.3 million in cap space is one of the clubhouse leaders. So, by the way, one more thing. We have 48 players under contract, which is roughly close to in line with most of the league. So no, we don't have a filling out the roster problem either right now. The teams that do have that problem would be like the Ravens and the Niners. So let me know what you think about all this. See you guys later tonight on Twitch. Go Hawks.